Welcome back to the channel. I hope you are doing extremely well this evening as always. I am glad to have you here, and tonight is going to be part 2 of our subscriber stories. So, a couple weeks ago I told you Samara's stories, but I also said that there was another subscriber who shared their stories with us on the channel, which is Katie. So tonight I am going to be telling you the stories that Katie shared with us. Now, these stories are mostly of the non-paranormal type. I say mostly because there is one story that is more like a glitch in the Matrix kind of story, but you'll hear all about it, don't worry. Now, with that being said, and of course, as always, without any further ado, let's get into tonight's stories, shall we? The first story that this wonderful subscriber Katie has sent me to read to you guys is called The Barn, and this is a story that is something that actually happened to Katie's father's friend Ivan in 1976. Now it's the 70s, so you know this is going to be damn creepy. Alrighty. The summer when the story took place, Ivan was 22 years old, but he pretty much looked like a teenager because of his wild black hair, his slim body and his rosy cheeks. Now he was working as a painter here and there to earn some money, and one day he got hired by an elderly man for a job at a cottage in the middle of nowhere. Now, the man who hired him looked very fit and strong, even though, according to Ivan, he must have been around 70 years old. Now, Ivan said that he looked like a war veteran or something very fit. He approached him in the park where Ivan was painting some benches. On his property, he had a barn, he said, that needed to be painted. Now, Ivan figured that he could use the money, so he decided to accept this job from this random man. Because it was the 70s, people, don't forget that. Okay, people were a lot more trusting in the 70s. So they drove out there in the man's car. Now, when they got there, the place was absolutely overgrown. It had an old cottage that looked abandoned and a strange small barn that was essentially like a wooden box with a ridiculously narrow door and no windows whatsoever. Now, Ivan asked why there were no windows, and the man said that he was planning to make them. He also said that if Ivan wanted to, he could do that job if he wanted some extra money, and Ivan agreed. So he started painting the barn that same evening. He was going to stay the night in the cottage and finish the barn the next day because, as we know, painters, they need to do more than one coat and it takes time to dry in between, so he's going to stay the night. Now, everything went well and according to plan, but the man wouldn't leave Ivan alone to do his work. The entire time he was sat on the grass next to the barn where Ivan was painting, asking Ivan questions. Now, this made him confused and uncomfortable because before that the man had been like very reserved and not talkative at all. And now suddenly every time Ivan tried to stop the conversation, which seemed more like an interrogation rather than a conversation, or when he tried to joke, instead of giving the man his actual private info, the man would insist on the answer. Now finally, it had gotten too dark to carry on painting, and they decided to have dinner and then get some rest. To Ivan's surprise, the man said that they were going to sleep inside the barn that he had just been painting. The cottage is absolutely ruined and unsafe, the man said. So he went to his truck and he brought 2 sleeping bags. Now, Ivan wasn't too keen on this idea. He said it was too hot in the barn and the smell of the paint was also way too strong and would just be unhealthy, so it would be better to sleep outside. Now the man said that they would leave the door open for the smell, and after a short argument, Ivan gave in and he went inside the barn. Now obviously he was really nervous, but he convinced himself that he was just being silly, and he went to sleep even though it was definitely too stuffy in there. The man was lying very still, without a sound, and then eventually Ivan fell asleep. He woke up when the sun was already up and the light was coming through the cracks in between the wooden planks. The door was now closed, and it was unbelievably hot in there. Upon seeing this, Ivan immediately started to panic because after all, they had agreed to leave that door open overnight. So he ran to it and he checked, and yes, it was locked. Now in sheer panic, Ivan started banging on the door and he heard the man shouting something from afar. Then the man walked up to the barn and said, "It's okay, boy. Look, I left something for you at the door." Now Ivan looked over, and that's when he saw a bottle of water and 2 sandwiches laying on the lid of a bucket. The man then added, "Please, use the bucket neatly, boy, or I'll have to discipline you, alright?" Now, Ivan then realised that the bucket was there to use as a toilet, and his heart dropped. He couldn't believe the situation he had gotten himself into. The man walked off and Ivan started banging on the boards, trying to break them. Now, after a few minutes of doing so, Ivan just got extremely dizzy because of how stuffy it was in the barn, and he also just wasn't getting enough oxygen in there. Now, a couple hours went by and suddenly he heard car noises and then men's voices. There were 3 of them, or maybe 4. Now suddenly the barn door opened and someone pushed Ivan back and stepped inside the barn with him. Ivan fell to the ground. He couldn't see the guy's face clearly, but the man took a proper look at Ivan, then stepped back out again, closed the door, and Ivan heard him say, "No, that's not the one I wanted." And then the men left. Now after that, everything just went silent. Ivan realised that they hadn't locked the barn door behind them, so he waited a few minutes to make sure the men were actually gone, and then he just bolted. It took Ivan almost 6 hours to get to the road and wave a car down to catch a ride to the city. Now to this day, he has no clue whether it was a hunt for some guy who had done something to those men, or he himself was there for sale, but the man didn't like him or something. Now, he of course went to the police about this afterwards, but the investigation just led to nothing. I'm not trying to say that things like that couldn't happen in today's day and age. But honestly, I think you would struggle finding someone trusting enough to just go with some random, strange old man who offers you a job painting his barn. I think in the 70s there would have been a higher chance of finding someone trusting enough to do that. And that is exactly what happened to Katie's dad's friend, Ivan. I mean, he honestly is so lucky that he got out of there. I mean, sorry, that guy walking in and saying, no, that's not the one I wanted, that does make it sound like Ivan was the thing that was for sale, right? Like, are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? Because this is just mental. What? Oh well, he is one lucky fella to have escaped that situation without any injuries as well. Like, he was perfectly fine. Obviously, he would have been shaken up and traumatized by this whole thing, and I don't think he would trust strangers so easily again either. But maybe that's a good thing. We shouldn't be too trusting, I feel like. And it's not like in the 70s there were more deranged people, like more weirdos and creeps and dark-minded people out there. It's just that people, civilians, fell for these things a lot easier than they do now. Like, I feel like as like the general population, we have become more educated on these things, and that's an extremely good thing. And I like to think that on this channel I maybe do my part a little bit in educating you guys. But that is wild. Wow. Ivan got lucky to escape that ban, I think, personally. Alrighty, on to the next story. So this one is one that actually happened to Katie and her friend Lena in 2014. And this story is called Glitch Street. Now this is a story where I was telling you guys it's more like a glitch in the Matrix kind of story. So it's very strange. Now, in April 2014, my friend Lena and I had to spend 3 weeks away from our hometown in a big old city where we hadn't been before. We instantly loved the place, and we tried to spend as much time as possible wandering around the streets and the parks. Now, we didn't use any maps. When it was time to go back to our flat, we just asked someone for directions. So one day, we decided to go to the cinema with a group of new friends that we had met there, and Lena asked me to meet her at the shopping mall at 4 p.m. So I got there nice and early at 3:45, and I was waiting while texting Lena on my phone. Now she wrote that she was coming on foot, and then for the next 40 minutes she wouldn't answer any of my messages or calls. Now obviously I was out of my mind, worried about her. And when she finally turned up at the mall, half an hour late, this is what she told me. So Lena said, I was walking to the mall, and at some point I saw a very interesting because I was supposed to turn right at the end of the main street anyway. So obviously I went into the cozy street to enjoy the scenery and have a look around, and to be honest with you, at first it did not disappoint. It was super pretty. But then I noticed that there weren't any people or animals. There weren't even any cars parked in the driveways. It was completely abandoned. I'd been walking for 15 minutes at that point, and I realised that this street was actually longer than I thought. I made it to the top of the hill and I was looking for the mall, but I couldn't see it, and I knew it had to be close. So I started to get slightly panicked because I thought maybe I'd gotten lost, but because I had already been walking for 15 minutes along that road, I decided to carry on. I tried to contact you, but I didn't have any cell reception whatsoever there. Like, it was super weird. I'm glad I did carry on, because after 10 more minutes of walking, I finally got to the end of the street and I could see people again. Turns out I wasn't actually too far away from the mall, so I couldn't have been too wrong about the direction of that street. Now, as soon as Lena got to the mall, both of our phones started buzzing, showing all of the notifications and the missed calls. Lena was quite shook, and at first she wanted to go back and find the street to show me, but we decided against it and we went to the cinema like we had originally planned. Now, the rest of the day just went well. That would have been the end of the story, but 3 days later we decided to go back to that cozy street, as we still had a feeling that it must be something special, right? So we went along the main street looking for the cozy alleyway with the red brick houses, but as you can probably guess, it seemed to just have vanished. We couldn't find this little side street anywhere. Lena is actually really good at memorizing places and ways. Normally, she doesn't get lost if she's been there before, but the street had just vanished. We tried to find it twice. We even started our way from the mall, as we knew it was close to that street, but not a trace of it. Then I tried Google Maps and also nothing. Now, I believe Katie when she says that Lena is one of those people who, is really good at remembering places and finding their way around. We all know somebody like that, and if you don't, then you will like it. You know those people who you will visit a place with them once, and then you won't visit again for a year, but a year later you come back and they still know their way around. Like, they always drive there all day, every day. You know, those kind of people. I'm imagining Lena to be that kind of person. So the fact that they couldn't find that street anymore, that's concerning. That is so weird. Especially because she already had, like, weird vibes from this street, like, as she was walking to the mall. And then for it to just vanish, or seemingly vanish, I mean, that is weird. But then again, like, if you've never checked out that Glitch in the Matrix sub, it is full of stories like these, like, where something will just appear out of the blue, or something will disappear out of the blue. Like, it is strange. Once that was actually quite funny, I'll keep it short, but once I read a story on Glitch in the Matrix where somebody said they were soaring a chunk of wood, and the piece that they had cut off of the wooden block, it fell, but then they didn't hear it fall on the floor, so they looked everywhere and that chunk of wood was just gone. And then a little while later, from a completely different account, I read a story on Creepy Encounters where they had gone to bed and they felt something while they were lying there in bed. They could feel something touching their leg, and they looked, and it was a chunk of wood, a random chunk of wood that had appeared in their bed. So they were asking in the Creepy Encounters sub whether, people thought that they might have been broken into or something like that, and somebody had placed a chunk of wood there as some sort of sick game. But we know the truth, right? It's that guy's chunk of wood that he cut off and that disappeared. It just reappeared in the other Redditor's bed. I mean, it is a wild one. It is absolutely some really wild stories that you can read on that Glitch in the Matrix sub. And this one is just very, very interesting. Katie also said that she was kind of jealous that it didn't happen to her, as she really wanted to check that street out as well, which I can wrap my brain around, although maybe wouldn't be something for me personally. I mean, I don't usually take strolls through vanishing streets, non-existent streets, so that's just something I don't regularly do. Alrighty, the last story that Katie sent is called A Sad Brother, and this is something that happened to her when she was a child. Now, Pasha and me became friends at school. It's basically the case of an extrovert Pasha adopting an introvert me. After school, we often went home together, and sometimes we spent time at my house till the very evening. Pasha lived a couple of blocks away from me, but he never invited me to his place. Then his birthday rolled around, and finally he said to me, a bit reluctantly though, that I could come over to his house for the occasion, and I was pretty excited about this. I was also kind of nervous because it meant I had to meet his whole family and all of his other friends, and I was shy and an introvert. Nonetheless, when the day actually came, it was great. The house was big and neat. His mum was a gorgeous, kind and chatty woman. His dad had lots of games for us to play. His grandparents were also super nice, and I couldn't understand why Pasha was so uncomfortable with me meeting his lovely family. Also, at the party, I met Pasha's older brother, Nicholas. He was 17 years old. Now, he looked a lot like Pasha, except he wasn't sociable at all. He only spent about half an hour with the guests, sitting in a corner and not looking at anyone. I thought it was a bit creepy, but I decided that he was maybe just moody or something. Now, since that day, Pasha started inviting me to his house every now and then. He'd usually say something along the lines of, "My parents aren't home today, so we can hang out in my room." I always agreed, eagerly. Now once, on a Sunday, I decided to go visit Pasha myself, uninvited, He opened the door, but he didn't let me in. Instead, he stepped outside on the porch and closed the door behind him. He said to me that he was home alone with his brother, so I was not allowed to come in. Now, after a while, I managed to convince him to come out and play hide and seek in the backyard. I counted to 50, walked around the yard, and decided, for some stupid reason, that it would be a good idea to go inside the house to find out what Pasha had been hiding. I know, stupid, very stupid. So I went inside and I went into the kitchen and then to the living room. I almost ran back out when I saw Nicholas on the couch. He looked at me and he had this incredibly sad and empty expression on his face. I asked if he was okay, if he was feeling well. He didn't answer, but I saw tears in his eyes and I felt that something was really, really wrong with him. I carefully approached him and awkwardly tried to comfort him. To my surprise and shock, this 17-year-old, almost fully grown man started whimpering. It looked so bizarre, but I couldn't bear to leave him in that state. I sat next to him and asked if I should call the parents or bring his brother in. Suddenly, he grabbed my forearm with a firm grip and he said, "No." He broke down crying on my lap, whimpering, holding my leg. Then I felt a sudden, very sharp pain in my hip. I cried and jumped up, trying to get away from him. Another flash of pain, lower in my leg this time, and he let me go. As he was looking at me, his eyes widened, like he got excited. He bared his teeth in the most terrifying smile that I had ever witnessed. In his hand, he held a bloody pocket knife. Now I ran straight home, with blood dripping down my leg. The cuts were luckily not too deep, and by the time I went into my bathroom, it had pretty much stopped bleeding, but my dress was completely ruined. Now I quickly took a shower, patched up my wounds, and hid the dress. I was terrified of my parents finding out what had happened. Also, I was even more terrified of what Pasha's parents and Pasha himself would say. The next day, I saw Pasha at school. He came up to me and he simply said, "We're not friends anymore." His brother is sick, he said, and it was all my fault. I asked if he had told his parents what had happened. He said he wouldn't, and he told me not to tell anyone either, as I truly felt guilty for what I had done. I agreed, and I did what he told me. Now, the following year, Pasha's family moved away. I haven't heard from them or anything about them, but I do hope that Nicholas got help and is now in a better state of mind. I don't really understand why the parents would have left Nicholas alone with his little brother. Maybe at the time they weren't aware of what he was capable of doing. I do feel sad about the whole story, and I will never unsee those eyes sparkling with joy and excitement at the sight of my blood. It's a creepy story. I mean, there's no denying that, but I think it's also a very, very sad story. Because clearly, Nicholas was a boy who was very much struggling with his mental health. Now, the scariest part of this story is the joy that he seemed to get when that is, yeah, that's just worrying. You think your mind goes to psycho, right? But I honestly believe that this boy had serious mental health issues and he wasn't being taken seriously. I mean, the fact that Pasha felt uncomfortable telling his parents about what had happened, I mean, it suggests to me that they were probably kind of ignoring Nicholas's problems. Also, what Katie says is true, like, if they were taking his mental health issues seriously, why would they leave their youngest son alone with their oldest son, who was in this state of mind? I mean, but it's a sad story. Because you know for a fact that if Nicholas didn't get the help that he needed, it was going to escalate, and it already pretty much did. But because nothing got done about this specific situation, you don't know if it escalated more. You just don't know. Like, if he doesn't get help, he might kill somebody, you know. Wow. I mean, I'm thinking the same as Katie. I hope that Nicholas did find help and that he's doing a lot better than that day. But yeah, wow, that is truly disturbing, and I can see how an event like this would stay with you forever. I mean, you wouldn't forget about that. About the time you got stabbed by your friend's older brother, like, that is wild. And also the fact that she couldn't say anything about it, she couldn't tell her own parents, she couldn't tell Pasha's family. I mean, it's sad because as a kid you oblige, you do what you're told. Wow. I'm sorry that happened to you, Katie. Alright, you guys, that was it for tonight's Scary Subscriber Stories. A huge thank you to Katie for sharing her stories with all of us on the channel. And of course, a huge thank you to you for choosing to hang out with me again tonight. If you yourself have any stories that you want to share with the channel and you'd like me to read on here, you can send me an email at shaleesquietplace@gmail.com, or you can send me a message on Instagram at shaleesquietplace. For now though, all there is left for me to do is to